They found skeletons holding hands in the streets, still radioactive thousands of years later. History says it was time. Physics says it was a nuclear blast. In the dusty annals of archaeology, there are discoveries that simply rewrite timelines, and then there are discoveries that threaten to tear our understanding of history apart. Deep within the Indus Valley, beneath layers of packed earth and 4,000 years of silence, lies a scene frozen in a horrific, inexplicable instant. Archaeologists found them lying in the streets of a once sprawling metropolis. Men, women, and children. They were not fighting invaders. They were not running from a volcano. They were simply stopped. They found skeletons holding hands in the streets, unburied and scavenged by no animal, still radioactive thousands of years later. History says it was simply their time. Physics says it was a nuclear blast. Mohenjo-Daro. In the local Sindhi language, the name literally translates to the Mound of the Dead. Built around 2500 BCE, it was a marvel of ancient engineering, boasting plumbing systems and urban planning that wouldn't be seen again in the West for millennia. But this was not just a city that slowly declined or was abandoned due to drought. The ruins tell a different story, a story of sudden, cataclysmic termination. When excavations began in the 1920s, the digging teams expected to find pots, jewelry, and perhaps the foundations of a trade hub. Instead, they uncovered a crime scene on a massive scale, preserved in the dry soil, waiting to whisper a terrifying secret to anyone brave enough to listen. Normally, when a civilization falls, nature takes its course. Bodies decompose, animals scatter remains, and new layers of earth swallow the past. But here, dozens of skeletons were found sprawling in the streets, contorted as if death came from the sky so quickly they didn't even have time to look up. What is most chilling is the preservation. These bodies were not buried, they were left where they fell. Yet there is no sign of rigor mortis or the typical decay associated with natural death. Even more disturbing, there were no signs of scavengers. Wolves, jackals, vultures, they all avoided this place. For thousands of years, nature itself refused to touch the dead of Mohenjo-Daro. Why? The answer might be invisible, but it is measurable. Decades after the initial discovery, researchers returned with technology that didn't exist when the site was first unearthed. They brought Geiger counters. As they swept the device over the ancient bones and the vitrified pottery scattered throughout the site, the silence of the desert was broken by the frantic clicking of their instruments. Some of the skeletons registered radioactivity levels 50 times higher than the natural background radiation. To put that into perspective, that is on par with the bodies found in the immediate aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How does a Bronze Age corpse carry the radioactive signature of the atomic age? But radiation is not the only fingerprint left by the culprit. Scattered across the site, archaeologists found strange blackened stones, shards of pottery and brick that had been fused together. This phenomenon is called vitrification. It occurs when rock and sand are exposed to temperatures in excess of 1500 degrees Celsius, turning them into glass. Volcanic eruptions can do this, but there are no volcanoes in the region. A meteorite impact could do this, but there is no crater. The only other time we see vitrification of this magnitude, turning the very earth into sheets of green glass, is at the nuclear testing sites in the Nevada desert. The heat required to do this is not generated by a simple wood fire. It requires the fury of a sun. When we look at the destruction of Mohenjo-Daro, the parallels to modern nuclear warfare are not just striking, they are terrifyingly precise. There is an epicenter of destruction where everything was crystallized and leveled. As you move outward, the damage becomes less severe, exactly consistent with the blast radius of a nuclear detonation. In modern times, we saw nuclear shadows, silhouettes of people burned into walls by the thermal flash of the bomb. In the ancient texts describing this event, they speak of the same shadows. Is it possible that the mushroom cloud is not a modern invention, but a rediscovered nightmare? Skeptics argue that ancient people simply didn't have the technology, but if we listen to their own words, they claim they did. The ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata, contains passages that for centuries were interpreted as poetic exaggeration, but read through the lens of the atomic age, they sound like a technical report. The text describes a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. It speaks of an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, that rose in all its splendor. Before 1945, this sounded like mythology. Today, it sounds like an eyewitness account. The text continues to describe the weapon, often referred to as the Iron Thunderbolt. It was a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andakas to ashes. The descriptions are specific. It says the corpses were so burned they were unrecognizable. The hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without cause, and the birds turned white. These are not standard descriptions of fire or sword warfare. Hair and nails falling out is the clinical definition of acute radiation sickness. How could an ancient writer describe radiation poisoning thousands of years before the discovery of the atom? The Mahabharata even gives instructions on how to survive the aftermath, instructions that eerily mimic modern decontamination protocols. The text advises soldiers to remove their armor and wash themselves and their equipment in the water immediately after the blast. Why would they do this? If it were just a fire, you would run. You wouldn't strip and wash. They understood that the very air and dust had become poison. This knowledge implies a familiarity with fallout that shouldn't exist in the Bronze Age, suggesting this wasn't the first time humanity had danced with extinction. The evidence isn't limited to the skeletons of Mohenjo-Daro. Just southeast lies the Lonar crater, a massive circular depression over a mile wide. While officially classified as a meteorite impact site, curious anomalies persist. There is no trace of the meteorite material one would expect to find beneath the impact zone. Instead, the basalt rock has been fused into glass under intense pressure and heat. Some theorists propose that if a war of this magnitude occurred, craters like Lonar might not be from rocks falling from space, but from weapons fired from the Earth. This phenomenon isn't isolated to India. Across the globe, from the vitrified forts of Scotland to the inexplicable fields of yellow glass found in the Libyan desert, we find evidence of heat that defies the technology of the time. In Scotland, entire stone fortresses were melted into slag. Archaeologists have tried to replicate this by burning wood walls, but they failed to reach the necessary temperature. Something hotter than fire, something faster than a siege, struck these locations simultaneously across the ancient world. Are we looking at a global conflict that history forgot? We view history as a straight line, an ascent from primitive caves to space stations, but the Vedic texts view time as a circle, a cycle of yugas. Civilization rises, unlocks the secrets of the universe, destroys itself, and the survivors start over from the ash, forgetting the godlike power they once wielded. Mohenjo-Daro might not be a mystery, it might be a mirror. It forces us to ask, are we the first advanced civilization on Earth, or are we simply the first to remember it this time around? The architect of our modern doom, J. Robert Oppenheimer, knew these texts well. He studied Sanskrit specifically to read the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata in their original form. Upon witnessing the first nuclear test in 1945, he famously quoted, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But fewer people know what he said later. When a student asked him if the Trinity test was the first atomic bomb ever detonated, Oppenheimer replied with a chilling qualification: yes, in modern times. He believed he wasn't inventing a new weapon, but rediscovering an ancient one. The skeletons of Mohenjo-Daro are still there, their radioactive bones singing a silent warning to a world that is once again stockpiling the power of the sun. We stand on the precipice of the same technology that likely silenced them. The glass in the sand, the shadows on the walls, and the verses in the holy books all point to one uncomfortable truth. We have been here before. As we dig up the past, we are digging up our own potential future. The radiation in the Indus Valley is fading, but the threat it represents is growing brighter every day. Civilization is a fragile thing, built on a cycle of forgetting and remembering. The question isn't whether the ancients nuked themselves. The question is, will we recognize the signs in time to stop the cycle, or are we destined to become the next mystery for a future civilization to unearth? Sleep well. If this nuclear evidence truly existed 4,000 years ago, then our entire history